Up next, we discuss the recently released autopsy report of the 2024 election from the Democratic Party and the deep divisions that remain in the party that may be setting them up to fail or at least underperform in the upcoming midterm elections. All right, welcome back to the Call Like I See It podcast. I'm James Keys here with Tunde Ogunlana. We're looking right now at the recently released Democratic or the 2024 election Democratic autopsy report that was withheld for a long time and then finally released. And it's the DNC has said that it's not complete and so forth, that they don't stand behind it. But it was an analysis that was done looking at Kamala Harris and how she lost and what was wrong with the Democratic Party in 2024. So with this has been talked about, around a lot, but I want to get from you, Tunde, what stands out in the autopsy to you as far as the either what's in there, what's not in there, so forth.
Yeah, I'd say what stands out to me is what I feel is a bit of a dissonance between, I would say, what the voters appear to want in terms of Democratic-based voters, the party to focus on generally, and what the party elites feel that they should be messaging and talking about. So that to me stands out a lot because I think that's irreconcilable, which I know we'll get into in this conversation.
Well, specify what's the base want, or what are the things that you think the base want, and what are the things that you think the elites don't want to touch on or they would rather talk about?
It's interesting. Some of it actually reminds me a bit. I know in the first part, we talked a little bit about the Republican Party's 2012 autopsy. So kind of similar about broadening the tent. And in here, I'll read a bit just from some of my notes. Rebuild support among working class voters, rural voters, middle America, and southern states, which is interesting, right? They want to grow that tent, which I think is a very fair observation of the party. And to focus messaging more on cost of living, jobs, housing, healthcare, public safety. And it appeared to me that in the 24 campaign, they had a candidate who did try and focus on that, but then seems to have been steered away from that by the consultants. And that's when she was gaining steam. Yeah. And an interesting thing, talking about, we got to talk about grocery prices, and if I win, I'll try and put caps on it and all that. Now, what's interesting is messaging, right? I remember at that time, her opponents began to say, well, she's going to do Soviet-style price controls. And that messaging was effective. So there is something to be said about, the inability of the Democratic Party to somehow message better. But to me, just to finish off, I guess, without me starting to have the whole show by myself, I just figure that's the big standout to me. Is the
half
dissonance.
Of the show can be about yourself. Just give me the other half.
No, let's not go there. Because I will take that half. I'll actually just start talking about me. That'll be that. You don't tempt me. I'll go there.
No, that's good. That's good.
It won't be about the DNC anymore. It'll be about what I'm doing for the rest of the day.
No. I think that what was missing and the effort. I really agree with you as far as the effort to steer away. The Democratic establishment seems to want to steer away from kitchen table issues and wants to try to make things about identity and so forth. Also, another thing that the report, the autopsy doesn't mention, which seems to me to be that it's the same people that were making decisions then that are making decisions now. Autopsy doesn't mention Gaza or Israel, which created a real divide within the party. There's two areas I think that you have a real divide in the party. One is on the economic side, and that's evidenced by the rise of the Democratic socialist people, like the self-proclaimed socialists that are out winning primaries or that win the mayor of New York job, win the job for mayor of New York. And these are self-proclaimed socialists. They whether either on par with a Bernie Sanders or further than that. And that you have the establishment or the more moderate Democrats that are made uncomfortable by that. So you have that schism. The other one is that's a big one. I mean, there's lots of types of things, but the other big one seems to be Gaza and Israel and the either unflinching, unquestioned support for Israel, no matter what they do, or whether or not we need to actually look at this more rationally and say, okay, can we ask everyone to be better, particularly if you're killing people, killing citizens and everything like that. And then also even further saying, no, I'm totally with Gaza, so there's there's a range there that it seems like the Democratic Party itself is having a hard time reconciling within its walls on where the party should be coming down on this stuff. And there's other issues in terms of how much you lean into social issues, identity issues and so forth. But I think the big ones are the economic and then the foreign policy specific with Israel and Gaza. And the party in 2024 and in this autopsy does not seem to have reconciled either one of those. And so that to me is what's really what stands out about the autopsy is that the divisions that one of which it does mention, the other ones it doesn't mention, it doesn't seem to have any ideas or plans as far as how to deal with that now anyway. Now I have thoughts and plans on how to deal with that, but I definitely want to kick it back to you as far as what I said and also where you have going forward from that, because I know you had a lot that you had mentioned to me specifically about the financial side.
Yeah, I think from the financial side would be, I think we can't ignore Citizens United and the ability of money being treated as speech in American politics, which I think, 200 years from now, someone will probably look back and say, yeah, who thought that was a good idea? Because now that unlimited money is allowed in politics, they say that in the autopsy, it said that Kamala Harris raised $1 billion last year. But James, I looked it up. The total amount spent in the 2024 election was $16 billion. And that's the numbers that I guess we know about. And that's because there's a lot of dark money allowed and all that. So can the American population, 100 million people given $20 or whatever, compete with a trillionaire and a guy who at the time was a multi-hundred billionaire given $300 million of his own money a couple months before a campaign and making a big announcement, and who owns major media platforms? Like, is that fair, right? And there's for 100 years, and in the environment you and I grew up, that was not fair. And now it is fair. And so now for Democrats, where it says focus messaging more on cost of living, jobs, housing, healthcare, public safety, again, that requires governance that we would have seen in the New Deal or something like that. Not the governance that allows, that's constantly about tax cuts and about making people like me better off. So that's kind of, to me, where I see the issue here is that the Democrats' constituency is billionaires, but they're talking like they're going to represent
the constituency of the Democratic establishment. You mean?
Yeah, correct. That's what I mean. Is that they raise money from billions? A lot of people don't know this. Elon Musk and Peter Thiel have a PAC that supports Democratic primary candidates, and as of March, me reading it in March of this year, it had already spent $36 million in congressional primaries. So my point is that I'm not saying anything against Elon Musk or Peter Thiel. What I'm saying is they seem to be the mindsets that aren't aligned with the Democratic base and how they see the world. Well, but do Democratic voters know that those guys are over there picking primary candidates in the Democratic Party because they're wealthy enough to?
Well, yeah, I think that's a part of it for sure. I think though that the issue that you run into with the Democratic Party, we historically, at least, we've all pretty much accepted the idea that, power corrupts and then absolute power corrupts absolutely. But the power corrupts part is a big part of this as well. Or it's not just the absolute power that you jump to. The Democratic Party, their incentive structures are all wrong in terms of structurally. They based how much power you have within the party based on how long you've been there, how long you've been in office, if you're talking about in congressional stuff, and also how good of a fundraiser you are. So that naturally disconnects you from the Democratic base completely, because how good of a fundraiser you are, essentially, it means that how flexible are your principles? Unless your principles are money, then you have to have very flexible principles to be a good fundraiser, because for this person, you got to have this message, for this person, you got to have that message, and so forth. So that broadens you out. And then to open the bigger dollars, so to speak, you got to talk to the bigger money, and the bigger money has different priorities than the Democratic base as it's laid out in this autopsy and as we've seen over time. The other thing I think is that I'd say my generation of Democrats, and I'm looking at it from the Gen X, which is myself, and then also late Gen X, but then also the baby boomers, I think lack conviction on economic policy. They don't believe that they don't truly in their heart of hearts believe, unlike somebody like, I'd say Elizabeth Warren, who would be a contra to this example. They don't believe that an economic system that is based on, let's say, New Deal principles actually can deliver a healthy economy where all boats can rise. And so it's very difficult for them to get out full throated and push for economic policies that would, again, I'll say more New Deal style policies that and then push for it full throated. It's almost like a meek way to push for it. Oh, we got to be nice to people. We got to give some people some, like more money here, more money there. And that lack of conviction comes through. Like, I don't think they believe that the stuff they're pushing from an economic standpoint, I don't think that they think it would work. When you got Kamala Harris out here talking about we're going to do tax credits for families and stuff, that's Republican light stuff from the 80s. Like, oh, so they made it cool for you to say that then. But they're not talking stuff that, oh, what we got to do is we've got to work with the top tax bracket. We got to work with the corporate tax bracket. We got to make sure that people who work hard can earn a living enough to live a middle-class lifestyle. They're not talking about that kind of stuff. And that opens the door. Actually, I'll get to the second part of this. That opens the door for the socialists, so to speak, because they're the only ones in the Democratic Party who have any conviction that they have an idea that could work from an economic policy standpoint. So some of it definitely is that the Democratic leadership is in the pocket of investors, but some of it is that they think the only stuff that works are the stuff that the Republicans talk about. And the irony of all ironies with that is that the stuff the Republicans talk about has never worked. The New Deal stuff actually did work for 20, 30 years. The Republican stuff, the trickle-down stuff, that's never worked. It's always relied on endless government borrowing in order to sustain anything. Always. And so to me, it's the irony of ironies is that the people whose system doesn't work, has never been shown to work, have infinite conviction on it. And the people whose system did work is like, they're tepid and meek, So, but there's a lot going on there, So I don't want to dominate the conversation. Go ahead. I do want to get to this tension in a second, but go ahead.
Well, but it's a different version of the lost cause, right? Like that's a cultural reality that history that happened was conveniently just changed and overlooked. And a lot of people wanted to believe that, right? And so it just became the way that people saw the situation from the Civil War. I think this is similar, James, that people want to believe in trickle-down economics and growth and all that. It's become, it wasn't cool to be a New Deal type of person in the 80s, 90s, 2000s. And I think that's where we get into what happened in the Democratic Party as relates around the Clinton era, right, in the 90s, where you get the deregulation, beginning of the real deregulation of the financial sector with stuff like the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act and things that, that we don't have time to get into in this discussion. But I think that's what happened is that
it's a good point, but let me throw this real quick because some people seem to value the way that the economic system was in the 1950s. But they're like the trad wife people, but they think the cause was something different. They think that the economics were good because women were at home. It's like, no, you idiot. The economics were good because of the way the system was set up, not because women were.
That's what I mean. Like,
but they look at that time period and fondly like, oh yeah, if we could just get back to that time period. They just don't know what brought us to that time period.
Yeah, I think that this is where going back to the autopsy thing, where I think the Democratic Party is going to shoot itself in the face again in this midterm election, and probably in 2028.
Let me set this up before we go into this part, because we've seen a tension within the Democratic Party, and I'd say 2026, but also 2025. This rising tension, and it seems to stem from the rise of a younger generation of politicians, the millennials, the Gen Zs, who many of them, not all of them, but many of them do have conviction as far as an economic idea, an economic system. And a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them will self-identify as socialists. And so this now, and then this on top of the fact you still have the schism with respect to Israel and Gaza that exists. So do you think that there's any chance for the party to come up with any kind of coherent message as, from a party standpoint? What does the party stand for? Other than, hey, Trump bad, ICE bad, do they have any other thing that they're going to be able to come together on in the midterm elections, which is coming up, this year?
The answer is no. Nothing that I think will be effective. That's my point. I mean, they'll find something, but I think it'll just backfire, and I'll explain why. I think because the conversation we're having here is interesting. Like, I'm going back, I'm looking at this note here of the cost of living, jobs, housing, all the things that people say they want. And you make a great point. Because I know there's so many people in the Democratic Party, in the Republican Party, all that seem so scared of these socialists like Mamdani and all this. And I think you're right. In the end, it's like it was when we did the show on Oppenheimer and what was going on in the 20s and 30s in America. Socialism and communism were very popular in the United States in the 1930s and the 1920s for the same reason they're gaining popularity again. Think about it, James. They weren't popular when me and you were kids in the 80s and 90s because there was a healthy equilibrium within the working class and the upper class.
Yeah.
And now there's not again. So it's the same thing. That's why I'm convinced now.
So the socialists are a signal that there's a problem.
Correct. Like since the French Revolution and that famous Marie Antoinette quote, "Let them eat cake," and they revolted and threw them the monarchy out of power. It's been kind of this last 300 years. It's the same cycle in these large societies, which is there's a certain small group of people with a bunch of wealth. There's a larger group of people that got to, the society needs to figure out what they're about. When the people with a lot of wealth understand the game and they're not too piggish about it and allow the bottom and the working class to eat a bit, the society tends to hum along. And when they don't, usually it breaks itself apart. And I think that's the concern I have, James, is that because of Citizens United and the real constituency of the Democratic elites, who they go get money from is the same who the Republicans get money from. The difference is the Republican Party doesn't pretend that it's about the working class in that way because they just give their base people to go hate. And that's enough emotionally that the base wants. The Democrats, what they're going to do, James, is, and I think I sent you the headline I was complaining about, which is their strategy already they're talking about is to now focus on the ICE rates.
Yeah.
And I was saying to myself, so that has nothing to do with cost of living, jobs, housing, or healthcare. That's not going to, matter to working class voters, rural voters, middle America, or southern states. That's all the stuff that the autopsy.
It's not that it won't matter. It just won't matter enough. That's not, those aren't the things that they're making their decisions based on, according to most of the polling and research that's being seen. And also the results that we've seen. Like if you want to make it about.
Yeah. Well, I want to say this, though, because of the psychology, James. I think a lot of Democrats and the Democrat-leaning people don't understand this. By them pointing out that ICE is doing this, they don't understand because they're projecting how they feel about it. They don't understand. A lot of Americans, that's going to remind a lot of Americans, oh, yeah, that's what I like about Trump. You know what I mean? Like,
not just that, because those aren't necessarily the people.
He's getting these people out of my country that I don't like.
But that's not necessarily the people they're trying to reach. It's just that may not.
It's not about them reaching them. They might motivate those people to get out and support.
It might be different groups of people. I don't think that necessarily is the reason why you don't talk about that stuff. That just may not be the thing that gets somebody off their couch. Who's like, all right, well, yeah, that's bad. I don't agree with that, but. Oh, well, but if you're out here talking kitchen table issues, that might be the stuff that gets them off their couch. I mean, and I think that what we're seeing now, actually, and I'm glad you brought up the 30s because I think it's really similar to that. There was a schism in the Democratic Party then, when, between you had the socialists and then how far was, you had the Dixiecrats then too. So that was a little different. But nonetheless, what the New Deal Democrats did was bridge the gap. If people don't know, a lot of people don't know this, but the socialists in the 30s and so forth were mad about the New Deal because the New Deal took a lot of their stuff, not all of it though. It wasn't punitive enough to the wealth class, but it took a lot of their stuff that were designed to spread the wealth a little bit more to allow everybody to benefit from the growth of the economy. The New Deal kind of stole the socialist thunder, which is why the socialists got marginalized for a long time after that. So as the Democrats have moved away from the New Deal, that's what has empowered the socialists at this point now. The socialists now say, oh, okay. And I'm not saying this is calculated amongst people that are 80 years old, but I'm saying that as the Democrats have become more Republican light from an economic messaging standpoint, that's created the lane for the socialists again, because the party itself has abandoned this ethos of we're trying to design an economic system that works for all, not just tax credits, which again, that's 1980s Reagan stuff, and so when that becomes what the Democratic establishment is about, we should not be surprised when you have the rise of the socialists. And if the Democratic establishment doesn't want these socialists run around, but just for full disclosure, I'm not afraid of socialists. I think that socialists do a very bad job of, I think they need to recognize that the word socialist has a negative connotation in America. And you should, even if you are a socialist, you shouldn't run around calling yourself a socialist. You have a bunch of reactionaries in the Republican Party and they don't go around calling themselves reactionaries. They call themselves nice, neat conservatives. You know, they call themselves conservatives because they know if they're out there telling people what they really were, people would be afraid of it. So what you call yourself, and we did a show years ago talking about these labels and how you can use the labels to your advantage or disadvantage. But nonetheless, the socialists rise because the Democratic establishment left. They went somewhere else, you know, on the coattails of Citizens United or whatever it is. They went somewhere else. Their economic messaging and economic policy has become disconnected from what was most successful. And just remember, the Democratic Party at post New Deal controlled the House for like 40 something years straight. You know, so this again, stuff that's been proven to work versus all this speculative stuff that's like, oh, we can do this, we can do that. So I think that and then now the tension with Gaza, I think, is just going to be that's a more difficult piece because it's a different part of the world, which I don't think Americans all appreciate all the complexities of. And so for us to try to hash all that out over here, you know, thousands and thousands of miles away with selective reporting, we all only get certain, you know, reporting on, oh, well, this is going on. And it's like, well, everybody's kind of only getting the stuff that supports what they already think. So it's just a difficult thing to build unity on because we're not close enough to it to really have, I don't think, there should be a lot more humility in terms of looking at that from the lack of the understanding that the information you don't have. Now, obviously, that's not a characteristic that's common in people, though. But the economic one should be a bridge that should be able to be made. Whether it will be in time for the midterms, I think you're right. It's probably too short of a time period. But that's the answer. You know, how you get, or whether you can get there is the question. So
we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. So, but yeah, I think we'll wrap this show from there. We appreciate everybody for joining us on this episode of Call Like I See It. If you didn't check it, check part 1 as well. Until next time, I'm James Keys.
I'm Tunde Ogunlana.
All right, we'll talk soon.